One of the weird facts about Utah is that the population in the state is extremely concentrated in a relatively small area. The western edge of the Rocky Mountains is called the Wasatch Front. This area, averaging 5 miles wide and about 120 miles long, is where 81% of Utah's population lives. Once you get beyond the 600 square miles or so in the Wasatch Front, you quickly discover vast stretches of open land. There are just about 81,500 square miles outside the Wasatch Front, dotted with an astounding number of small towns. One of the small towns I've been through well over 100 times in my travels is Panguitch, which is the county seat of Garfield County. It is located along U.S. Highway 89, approximately 67 miles north of Kanab. The name of the town looks strange. Some people pronounce it as Panguitch, but locals pronounce it as Panguitch. The town takes its name from a southern Paiute Indian word meaning big fish. It is one of dozens of small towns that dot U.S. Highway 89 as it runs north and south through the state. First called Fairview, the town was settled in 1864 by Mormon pioneers, like many other small Utah towns. Due to harsh conditions, the town was abandoned a year later in 1865 and resettled permanently 6 years after that in 1871, when the name was changed to Panguitch. Since those early days, Panguitch has grown to just over 1,700 people. If you drive through the area much, you quickly realize that there are two primary industries in the area: agriculture and tourism. Panguitch is only about 20 miles from Bryce Canyon National Park, which means you can find lots and lots of motels and RV parks in the town. I was reading in a travel guide a while back, and it had what I consider to be a harsh judgment on the town. It said, other than some interesting turn-of-the-century brick homes and buildings, Panguitch has few attractions. People mostly fill up with food and fuel, rest up, and move on. Ouch! If you take a bit more time to consider the town than this judgment, you'll discover that Panguitch has quite a bit to offer, and you could easily spend a day or two here viewing the sights and drinking in the history before you ever set foot in one of the nearby national parks. When coming from the northern parts of Utah, it's a safe bet that you'll drive south along Interstate 15. At exit 95, you'll head east on State Route 20. This route is the shortest connector between I-15 and U.S. Highway 89. The 20-mile route takes you through some great mountains and valleys. Just about 7 miles before you reach U.S. Highway 89, you'll come across the turnoff to Bear Valley Road. As you can see, this is designated as the route of the original Spanish Trail, dating to the first half of the 1800s, before there were even any settlements in the area. To me, this route is one of the great attractions in the Panguitch area, as you can travel just over 20 miles on Bear Valley Road through Dixie National Forest. It's a dirt and gravel road and impassable in the winter, but when I visited in the middle of May, I quite enjoyed the ride. If you continue further east along State Route 20, in about 7 miles you'll dead end into U.S. Highway 89. Turn south, and in another 10 miles you'll reach Panguitch. The entire town was designated as a National Historic District in 2007, and it is clear that history is something in which the citizens take pride. Just at the north edge of town, there is a small rest area that's easy to miss. Maintained by the local Lions Club, you can find historic displays and walkways over Panguitch Creek so that you can get to the Garfield County Fairgrounds. One of the displays is this quilt, which I'll talk about in more detail shortly. It doesn't take long to drive the length of historic Main Street, and U.S. Highway 89 turns east once you reach Center Street. Don't rely on driving, however. You'll enjoy your visit more if you park the car and take some time to walk the route. You'll find great shops and restaurants, and there is even a community movie theater you can visit. Along the way, you'll find historic displays that talk about the buildings and their histories. There are buildings here that date to the early 1900s that are still in use. For instance, the historic social hall is still used for recreational purposes by the community. Notice the old fire wagon out front, once used to pull water to any place a fire might break out. Just a bit to the east is an old Carnegie library that is still standing, and still further east is the Bishop's Storehouse built in 1907. This is where Mormons donated their tithes and offerings, and where those who needed assistance could receive it. Today the building serves as a museum, which opened in 1964. During the summer months, you can step into the past and see exhibits of area artifacts from days gone by. Remember that quilt that I mentioned a while ago? It doesn't take long when you walk around the town to discover that quilts are a big deal in the area. The first time the town was settled, in 1864, the winter was very hard and the settlers faced starvation. 7 men volunteered to cross the rugged mountains west of town and get food from Parowan. They took that same Spanish trail I mentioned earlier, except the deep snow meant that they couldn't use wagons or horses or even oxen on the route. With no choice but to walk through the deep snow, the men laid out a quilt on which they knelt to plead for God's assistance. As they did so, they noticed that the quilt stopped them from sinking in the snow. They ended up walking on the quilts, laying them out in front of them, taking them up as they walked, and creating a perpetual walkway. Over the course of 2 weeks, the 7 men were able to bring back enough flour and provisions to save the town from starvation. The settlers considered the trip and the supplies to be a result of divine providence. Today, the town commemorates that event with what it calls the Panguitch Quilt Walk Festival. It is a time for quilters to come together and ply their craft, but more importantly, it's a time to remember those 7 men. On Center Street, you'll find the Quilt Walk Park, where there are 7 benches, one for each of those men. Carved into the top of each bench is biographical information about each of them. No discussion about Panguitch would be complete without talking a bit about the town cemetery, which is on the southwest edge of the community. The most famous interment in this cemetery is that of John D. Lee, who was buried here after he was executed in 1877 for his part in the 1857 Mountain Meadows Massacre. He is also famous for Lee's Ferry, a northern Arizona site I discuss in another video. All in all, Panguitch is more than just a place to fill up with food and fuel. While you can do that, you'll miss so much history that this small Utah town has to offer. I hope you enjoyed traveling with me a bit today. If you have any comments, I'd love it if you left them below.